I know I said I'd be back this week with a full episode, but here's what happened. A couple of weeks ago, I got messages from two different listeners telling me I should look into Franklin Castle in Cleveland, Ohio. So, Monica and Julie, thanks for sending me down this rabbit hole. Since I'm from Ohio, I figured I'd spend an evening reading about it. That didn't happen. One article led to another, and before I knew it, I was chasing a completely different story. It wasn't really about the castle. It was about one story that almost everybody seemed to accept as history. And honestly, I thought it was too interesting not to share. Have you ever heard something about a person so many times that you just assumed it had to be true? Maybe you don't remember where you first heard it. You couldn't tell someone who originally said it. But after you've heard it enough, it stops feeling like a story. It starts feeling like history. Franklin Castle stands on Franklin Boulevard in Cleveland, Ohio. Its real name is the Hans Tiedemann House, though almost no one calls it that anymore. Built in the 1880s for the Tiedemann family, it's a large Victorian mansion built from stone with tall windows, carved woodwork, servant stairways, and even a tower rising over one corner of the roof. It's beautiful, but it also looks exactly like the kind of place that people would expect to be haunted. And that's what Franklin Castle became known for. People reported footsteps moving through empty rooms, doors opening on their own, objects disappearing, and figures seen inside the house. There were stories about children, a woman dressed in black, and sounds coming from parts of the building where no one was supposed to be. The Tiedemann family had also been through a lot of loss. Hans Tiedemann was a German immigrant who became a successful grocer and banker. He and his wife Louise lost several children before the mansion was completed, and Louise herself died in 1895 while they were still living there. Those losses were real. The murder stories came much later. We'll come back to that. Human skeletal remains were even found inside a concealed space in the building. They were never conclusively identified, and no reliable connection was ever made between those remains and the Tiedemann family. Franklin Castle was already one of those places where every room seemed to have another story attached to it. In March of 1980, a self-described medium who was living in the house spoke with a reporter from the Cleveland Press. She claimed she had communicated with the spirit of Hans Tiedemann. According to her, the conversations happened during her time living there. And according to her, the dead owner of Franklin Castle had confessed to murder. According to the story, there were two victims, a woman named Rachel and a girl named Karen. Rachel was said to have been a servant in the house. In one version, she was Tiedemann's mistress. In another, she rejected him. In yet another, she was getting ready to marry someone else. The way she was supposedly killed changed too. She was strangled, shot, attacked with an axe, killed in the servants' quarters, or murdered shortly before her own wedding. Karen's story changed just as much. She was described as Tiedemann's niece, his illegitimate daughter, or a young girl who had supposedly been hidden somewhere inside the house. Depending on the version, she was hanged, struck with an axe, or killed somewhere inside one of the house's concealed passages. The names stayed the same, but almost everything else changed. That confession gave people a completely different way to look at Franklin Castle. And once people believed there had been murders, every strange thing inside that house suddenly had an explanation. It's amazing what one newspaper interview can do, one extraordinary claim. Pretty soon, people remembered Hans Tiedemann not as a successful Cleveland banker, but as a murderer. The house was already known for apparitions, strange activity and ghosts connected to the Tiedemann family. But now those hauntings could be connected to something much darker. Murders Hans Tiedemann had supposedly committed inside the house. A strange room could be where someone had been locked away. A narrow space behind a wall could be a hiding place or a path to a concealed chamber. A figure seen on the stairs might be one of the women he had killed, and the bones found inside the house could belong to one of his victims. Even the real losses in the Tiedemann family could now be seen as part of something much darker. The house hadn't changed. What people believed about it had. Over the years, the stories kept growing. More servants appeared. More victims were added. And Tiedemann was accused of killing members of his own family. Concealed spaces became murder chambers, and apparitions were matched with people whose supposed lives and deaths were repeated right alongside the real history of the house. After a while, the story sounded old enough that people stopped questioning it. It felt like Cleveland had always known Hans Tiedemann was a murderer. A local historian named William G. Krejci wanted to know where those stories had actually come from. He didn't try to contact anyone inside Franklin Castle. He started looking through census documents, death certificates, old newspapers, family information, and the kinds of records that usually leave at least some trace of a person who lived and died in a city like Cleveland. Krejci spent years researching the house and the Tiedemann family. When he looked for Rachel, he couldn't find a servant who matched the story. When he looked for Karen, he couldn't find a niece, a daughter, or a young relative who fit the legend. The stories could tell you who these women were, why Tiedemann wanted them dead, how he killed them, and where their bodies had been hidden. But the records couldn't show that the women, as the stories described them, had ever even been there. Krejci also couldn't find any reports from Tiedemann's lifetime accusing him of murder. There were no 19th century newspaper stories about suspicious deaths inside the mansion, no known investigation that treated him as a killer, and no surviving account suggesting that people in Cleveland believed the wealthy banker on Franklin Boulevard was hiding bodies inside his home. That version of Hans Tiedemann appeared much later. Around the same time, a medium told a newspaper that his ghost had confessed. None of this tells us whether Franklin Castle is haunted, by the way. It doesn't explain the footsteps, the figures, the doors, or the experiences that people have reported inside. And it doesn't prove that every dark part of the house's history has been uncovered. But a medium said the spirit of a dead man had confessed to murder. The supposed victims were given names, and their stories spread through books, TV programs, tours, and websites. When a historian went looking for them, he found the confession everywhere. He just couldn't find the people. Hans Tiedemann is still remembered by many as the murderer who lived inside Franklin Castle, even though no one appears to have accused him while he was alive, and no evidence of those crimes has ever been found. All because nearly 85 years after he left the house, someone claimed his ghost confessed. And it makes me wonder, how many stories do we believe simply because we've heard them for so long? At what point does a legend stop sounding like a legend and start sounding like history?